This event right now is like one of our regular monthly, bi-monthly quick reads. So this is all brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, whose mission is to elevate the voices of women and all underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through all these inclusive events. And so you can learn more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout that we'll put the link in the chat. And visit the website and keep in touch. So I'm your host today, and this is my first time hosting these, so forgive all the errors. I'm in the handout too, so you can find out about me and send me mocking emails later on. But do keep in mind that we're recording this session. You watch me start the recording, so you'll get to watch it later. So you are not allowed to record. It's not just a little bit rude to be sneakily recording. It's actually illegal. So you're not allowed to record any electronic communications without express permission. So we're all going to be good people here. So in this hour, we're hoping to feature 6 authors. A couple have been having trouble joining us, but never fear. So on our reading list today is Amy Grech, Gillian Polack, Angela Yuriko Smith, Holley Cornetto, N.D. Jones, and Nicole Wolverton. I'm hoping we'll get to hear from all of them. Everyone gets 8 minutes to read. Okay, so everyone take a deep breath. Our first reader of our last session is Amy Grech. Amy Grech has sold over 100 short stories to various anthologies and magazines, including Even in the Grave. Amy is an active member of the Horror Writers Association who lives in Forest Hills, Queens. Amy, take us into your world.
All right. I'll be reading from my story, Bruised and Battered Nevermore, Even in the Grave. Something strange about the decrepit apartment in Brooklyn where Jackie Crawford lived for the last year unnerved her. The lack of heat and hot water didn't set her on edge. No, it was something far more ominous. Her boyfriend, Jeff Dutton, had a hunch one night while they snuggled on the couch and watched The Exorcist. She leaned on his chest, and he wrapped his strong arms around her to keep her warm, both inside and out. When the movie ended, they heard a loud click that caused Jackie to flinch and set Jeff on edge. What was that noise? Cringing, Jackie clung to Jeff. Beats me, he shrugged. Maybe your creepy neighbor, Al, snuck in while we were watching the movie to poke around your lingerie drawer, Jeff snickered. He looks like a pervert to me. Jackie punched his arm, a playful love tap. That's not funny. He stopped laughing. Lighten up. She sat bolt upright on the couch. Something's wrong. Better go see what it is. Sure thing. Jeff got up to look around, straining to see in the dark. He flicked the light switch and searched for intruders. There was no one in the living room besides Jackie. Cautiously, he made his way into the bedroom with Jackie skulking nearby and turned on the light. They found the room unoccupied, but the window was half open halfway despite the chill. Why did you leave the window open? He asked, teeth chattering as he shut it. She frowned. I didn't. I thought you did. Nope. I didn't touch it. Jeff shook his head. I probably opened it last night for some fresh air. Jackie bit her lip, unable to remember touching the window. Why would you do that? It's a bit nippy out this time of year. He folded his arms and rubbed them to keep warm. Sheesh, I forgot to shut it. Cut me some slack. She frowned. Why don't you keep me company in the kitchen while I whip up some hot chocolate? Roger that. Jeff followed her into the kitchen and sat down at the table while Jackie puttered around near the stove. 5 minutes later, they brought their steaming mugs of hot chocolate with marshmallows back into the living room and set them down on the cluttered coffee table crammed full of books about ghosts and other atrocities. Jeff picked up a dog-eared paperback, The Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe, and started thumbing through it. Where did you get all of these books? My super Simon gave them to me when I told him I'm an author. That's why there's so many. He's a spiritualist who believes in the paranormal and all its guises. He nodded and set the book back atop a shaky stack. How thoughtful. Looks like you've got Lots of inspiration to draw from here. Definitely a genuine wellspring. Jackie smiled and sat next to him on the couch. This is guaranteed to warm you up. Not like you do. Jeff kissed her deeply, making her blush. She took a sip of hot chocolate. He hoisted his mug and took a long drink. Halloween's right around the corner. Should I be scared? Jackie rested her head on his shoulder. Yeah, I think you've got ghosts. He leered at her. She laughed. What gives you that idea? You've got a window that opened all by itself, and seeing as how you don't remember doing it, what else could it be? He set his empty mug in his lap. Jackie finished her hot chocolate and brought their mugs into the kitchen. I don't know. That noise we heard could have been anything. Like what? Jeff followed her. Her eyes lit up. A stray cat knocking over a garbage pail. It sounded much worse than that, didn't it? He scratched his head. Definitely. And look, the picture in the living room that came with the apartment fell again. Jackie pointed to the wall adjacent the window where the picture that depicted a murder of crows mid-flight on a dark, stormy night lay on the ground. Her boyfriend frowned. Does that happen a lot? All the time, she replied, rolling her eyes. Let's go see if Cy is home. Maybe he can get to the bottom of this. Right. Since Cy is a soothsayer, he can raise the dead. Jeff wiggled his fingers in the air for effect, as if conjuring spirits. Not quite. If we know why the spirit is unhappy, we can hold a seance to help right the wrong and hopefully put an end to these strange happenings, she said, sighing. What's with all this spirit mumbo-jumbo? I didn't know you were into that. Jeff folded his arms. You don't believe in ghosts, do you? Jackie grabbed her keys off the kitchen table. Not unless I can see them, you know, like Casper the Friendly Ghost. There are no friendly ghosts. Besides, Casper is just a cartoon character, she countered. He slammed the door shut and followed her to the super's apartment on the first floor. What makes you think such an expert? Jeff frowned. The picture of crows doesn't spend a lot of time hanging on a living room wall. It's constantly falling. That's why the glass is cracked, she cringed. Or it might be a weird coincidence. Let Cy be the judge, Jackie quipped. They walked down 3 flights of sagging stairs to Cy's apartment. Jackie knocked once and waited. As usual, Cy had the TV blaring, so she knew he was home. They heard him shuffle over to the door and fumble with 3 deadbolts. Don't get your panties in a knot, I'm coming, Cy's stern voice declared. She cleared her throat and blushed, caught off guard by the old man's crass choice of words. Jeff snickered. The door creaked open. Cy, a tall, slight man with fluffy tufts of white hair sticking up every which way, appeared in the doorway. The super smiled when he saw Jackie, but looked confused when he realized she wasn't alone. And I'll stop there. You can pick up Even in the Grave on Amazon if you want to know what happens.
Thanks so much, Amy. That was fabulous.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That was fascinating. It was very distracting. I was supposed to be doing chores.
I'm glad I distracted you.
Yeah. So for further distraction, learn more at they've already changed slides at Amy's website, which I put in chat just a minute ago. Our next reader is Gillian Polack, who is here with us, almost like one of our ghost guests earlier in the day. Dr. Gillian Polack is an award-winning Australian speculative fiction writer. She was awarded the 2020 A. Bertram Chandler Award for Lifetime Achievement in Science Fiction. Her most recent novel is The Green Children Help Out. Her novels are science fiction and fantasy, which is odd, for she's an ethno-historian. Gillian, you'd better come in and explain yourself.
Hello. I'm going to give you a reading from The Time of the Ghost, but I'm also going to sneak in something from elsewhere because my Time of the Ghost reading is far too cheerful. It turns out that it is ghostly, but the other one is more ghostly. So let me just get started, and I've got to change my screen because it won't let me read. So I'll be reading from the screen. So this is my favourite scene in Time of the Ghost, so I'll start with that. We're talking about 3 women aged 60 up and a teenager. Here, said Anne, I can see them. There's a whole gang lurking beneath the big tree, just ahead on the right. The big tree was deciduous and the moon shone very clear through its skeleton. Suddenly, Kat didn't like what she saw. Not at all. Anne seemed to know what she was doing. She walked right up to them and towered over them and said, "Get out of here. Get out of Canberra. Get out of Australia." Her voice was very firm. She was very brave. A moment later, she was surrounded by short, jeering, man-like creatures with big eyes and bigger mouths. "Get out of here yourself," one said. "Get and make us." The crowd laughed and chatted and pressed in. The Abbey lovers were short, but they were threatening. Katz took a step back. Mabel took 2 steps back. A couple of little men noticed her. Instantly, half the swarm was around Mabel as well, poking and prodding and pushing. Mabel stepped back until she was pressed into a big letterbox. The jabbering and the hollering and the calling got louder and more vile until even the air sounded crowded. Some of the lubbers started making obscene gestures and calling to their mates what they wanted to do to them, and 1 or 2 started doing more than gesturing. Kate stood there stunned. Her grannies were being attacked by little man-like things. It was indecent. It was wrong. It froze Kat to the spot, silent, hurting. Then, just behind her, to her right, she heard a quiet sob. Lil was crying. Kat lost her temper. "You there." She strode in and poked at one of the lubbers crowded against Mabel. "You think you're so bloody big. Look at you. Tiny. Takes a really small man to say those things to an old woman. Takes an idiot. A real twerp. You think you're an Abbey lubber? You're not a lubber. You're just a lub. Something small and stupid." Kat kept talking. She didn't notice that everyone and everything was watching her and that every single mouth was agape. She was so focused on that one creature and his golem eyes that she couldn't stop herself. At the back of her mind, she heard Lil crying, always. She saw Mabel scared. She saw Anne trapped. "You hurt my grannies. I hurt you. Do you know how many teenagers there are in the city?" Kat flung the words at the crowd of creatures like a challenge. 10 times your number, 100 times, 1,000 times. Every single human aged 13 to 19, every single teenager in this town will stand outside every pub and every bar and every restaurant, and they will watch for you. I won't tell them what to do either. They will know what to do. Teenagers know stuff. Some of them will just stand and look. That night you'll be all grateful. Just a bunch of teenagers standing and looking, standing and looking, standing and looking. Have you ever seen how a teenager can stand and look? It shrinks you inside. It makes you tinier than tiny. But that's not the worst thing that will happen to you. Oh, no. Some of us are old enough to get into bars. Some teenagers drink. And those friends of mine, those drinking age friends, they'll notice you in every bar, in every restaurant, wherever you get your drinks. They'll notice you. They'll look at you and laugh at you and point at you. You won't be able to hide in the darkness, finishing up everyone's leftovers. Everyone will see your dirt and your eyes and your strange mouths. Everyone will know you don't belong here. Everyone will watch and watch and watch until you can never be invisible again. Look at me looking at you. I'm memorizing you. I'm going to go on the internet and tell everyone, not just in Canberra, everywhere, every teenager in the world. And you know what? We don't even have to hate you. We don't need to poke you the way you're poking my oldies. We don't need to say rude things and threaten. We don't need to be obscene. All we have to do is look. And as you can see, that was far too cheerful, so I'm going to finish with a bit from a short story called Passports. It's in a volume called Mountains of the Mind. Christy is visiting an old plantation. It's her very last day in America, and this makes up for the Australian teenagers who are allowed to drink a lot younger than American teenagers. Christy looked back at the house. She thought she saw a shadowy figure in a little window. They hadn't been shown that section. In fact, they'd only climbed as high as the big balcony. The figure waved, maybe at her, maybe at the sad remnants of the other tourists. It pointed across the lawn to the levee. She squinted to get a better view of the upper room, but there was no one at all there now. The lady had to be pointing at something or someone. What was she trying to say? Her feet shifted in the deep grass as Christy decided what to do. In the end, she said to herself, 3 more minutes. I'll check it out. Bridget can wait just 3 more minutes. Christy heard the sound of a horse-drawn carriage getting closer. You have a great imagination, Christy scolded herself. She ought to get back to the car. They still had to drive through the back blocks of Louisiana, and that had been eerie enough on the way here with all the mangroves and strange little petrol stations and those white alien petrochemical globes growing out of the landscape. A horse neighed, and the carriage sound clattered to a halt. Christy took a deep breath and looked away from the house, towards where the Mississippi hid behind the levee. Instead of the levee rising to the sky and masking the horizon, Christy saw the oaks extended to the waterfront. She wanted to work out the trick of the eye that caused the ground to look flat. She started counting the trees again as she walked through the oak alley to the water. Mr. Glasses shouted something. Christy couldn't hear what he was saying, but she turned and waved politely. I'm just going to the end of the trees, she shouted back. I want to see the water. He started running. Christy shrugged. She'd meet him at the water's edge. A raven flew down from the first oak. It stopped right in front of her. She eyed it. It eyed her. She was spooked. I'm just homesick, she thought. She took out her passport and held it where she could see it. What a stupid thing to do, she told herself. As Christy walked closer and closer to the water, her emotions were odd. First, she felt the weight of time. It trapped her between land and sky. It froze her breath and it froze her body. Everything that she felt was magnified and magnified and more magnified until her feelings and her pain were the only world she experienced. When they unfroze, she started to walk again. She didn't control the direction in which she walked. A sharp blade cut into her soul and loosened it. It wedged itself inside her and levered an opening. Soon the small dislocation she carried with her all day drew her half-frozen body away from the land and the earth and the sky and into another Louisiana. The only words left to Christy were empty. I am empty. She fought the emptiness inside. She fought the emptiness outside. She looked for words. She looked for ideas. All she had was a blankness, one that grew and grew. She looked up at the gentlemen. Their warm oak foliage sheltered her. Numbers help fill emptiness, she thought. She counted the trees again in pairs. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. At 10, the window into her soul opened a little wider. She kept walking and counting. There was safety in walking and counting. There was always safety in numbers. 12, 14, 16, 18. A child's voice filled the void, the sound of a horse in a billiard room, the chatter of French and the warm scent of summer melons. Christy could not stop walking. She wanted to. Defiantly, she held her passport in front of her. 20, 22, 24, she was there. She'd reached the water. The trees no longer protected her, not the live oaks, not the dead oaks. Her passport slipped from her hands. Christy was nowhere, or she was under the levee, caught in time, trapped by the weight of the past. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, that was beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing not one, but 2 readings today. Wow. That was wonderful. So, Angela, are you ready? Let me tell you about our next reader, who is Angela Yuriko Smith. Angela Yuriko Smith is a 3rd-generation Shimanshu American award-winning poet, author, and publisher with 20-plus years of newspaper experience. Publisher of Space and Time magazine, established in 1966, 2-time Bram Stoker Award winner, and an HWA Mentor of the Year. She shares Authortunities, a free weekly calendar of author opportunities at her website. So look for that when I drop the link into chat. So, Angela, I leave the floor to you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for all the immense organization. We know there are not ghosts back there. That's real people doing this. So thank you. I'm going to read a real life ghost story that happened to me. And this is out of Unquiet Spirits. And it's part of my essay. The ghost is called a Nikekubi. A Nikekubi, meaning detachable head, is a yokai or ghost. More specifically, the head of a ghost. By day, she blends in with everyday people. At night, her head detaches from her body to roam the earth, searching for victims. She attacks by screaming to immobilize her victims with terror and then biting. Many believe she's just another cultural story like the Slavic folktale of Baba Yaga, or a vampire that travels as a firefly in the legends of the Ute people of Ghana and Togo. She has been picked up with creative license to haunt modern culture through anime and games. The creature known as Mischievous in the popular Pokemon games is Nikekubi. Yes, children of all ages are playing with the vampiric head of a woman. She's not just a story to me, however. I've seen one. I was 13 years old, living in Sweetwater, Tennessee, with my Southern grandparents in a worn-out Victorian-style mansion long past its glory days. Faded red wallpaper with a raised pattern in black velvet, and lead crystal was everywhere. There were too many rooms to count, many of which served some outdated purpose, like the sitting room or the formal dining room. There was a main staircase and then the hidden back staircase that connected the kitchen to the quarters. For a girl raised on too many ghost stories, it was a brilliant place to explore. It was in one of these rooms, officially known as the formal parlor, that my grandparents kept a fully stocked bar. As owners of an actual licensed bar for many years, they always had plenty of everything booze. I decided to expand my education of alcoholic beverages every Friday at noon when my grandmother would walk across the street to visit Mrs. Jacobs, our elderly neighbor. The trick was to act disinterested as she left. She'd ask if I wanted to go visiting with her. I'd decline, feigning extreme interest in whatever book I was reading until she was out the door. Then I'd stand out of sight in the hall to watch her through the diamond-shaped pane of glass around the door. As soon as I saw her enter Mrs. Jacobs' house, I headed for the formal parlor and the liquor. The day I was introduced to my Nikekubi was like any other until I was a few feet in the room. A loud, sharp noise stopped me in my tracks. Against one window was a big wooden stereo console-type player that included, fancy at the time, an 8-track cassette deck. See, I can't even remember what they're called anymore. An 8-track cassette deck, AM and FM radio, huge wooden speaker cabinets, and a turntable on top covered in an amber plastic half box. It was from that amber plastic that I heard the first sharp rap. It was curious because there was nothing that could hit the plastic cover to make that noise, not from my angle of view. I moved closer to investigate when a second rap sounded right in front of me, and I saw nothing. Nothing had shifted the lightweight box. The inevitable dust that clung to these contraptions was undisturbed. The noise had to be coming from something behind the stereo, out of my view. The third rap sounded as I stepped forward. A noise to my left distracted me. All the pendants in the ornate chandelier were shaking. As they swung together, they sounded like a few dozen people frantically toasting each other with tiny glasses. But from beneath all the tinkling of crystal came another sound, welling up to drown out all the others. It was a rising tempest. I'm still not sure if the sound of rising wind was in the room or in my mind, but within seconds it filled my ears and I could hear nothing else. In the middle of the vibrating chandelier was a distortion in the air, like the heat wave coming off a hot fire. I had a sense it was sentient, perch hovering and fully aware of me. And then it swooped. I've stood in the winds of Hurricane Ivan in 2004 as it laid waste to the Gulf Coast since then, and that hurricane tearing the roof off my neighbor's house was nothing compared to the noise filling my head in that parlor. It was loud enough to drown out my own thoughts. I was stunned and frozen until it swooped down at me. I ran to the hallway, and the sudden silence was as paralyzing as the noise. First deafened with storm, now with the utter absence of it, I turned around. The distortion hovered in the open doorway, rippling nothingness bobbing up and down. The only thing I was positive of was that it was looking at me. I was seen. And then it came at me again with all the accompanying cacophony of shrieking wind. I'm not sure how I made it to the front porch. I have fragments of memory, my hand slipping on the old glass doorknob, the loose way it turned, and then the battered storm door slamming behind me. Again, the noise evaporated with such finality, it shocked me to stillness. I stood on the porch, back to the door, unable to move. I had a sense that if I kept running, it would follow, and eventually it would catch me. Better to face it here on familiar ground than in the tobacco fields that surrounded us. Normal sounds filtered into my awareness, just as a different type of awareness came over me. A clear image formed in my mind, as clear as if I had eyes in the back of my head, and it was of the door behind me. I could also see straight ahead to Mrs. Jacobs' house. In my vision of the door behind me, there was a head floating in midair behind the glass. A woman, her skin pale with a doughy, gelatinous texture. She was soaked. Liquid ran down her face, and long black hair as if she had just risen from the water. Her hair was plastered to her bloated face, like flat tentacles. Her mouth gaped open in a silent scream. Her neck was torn from her body. Shreds of waterlogged skin dangled, along with cords and flesh dripping into the carpet. When my grandmother returned from across the street, I told her what had happened, and she believed me. Now I wonder if there was a trail of drip marks from the parlor to the front door, or if she had connected it to a story of previous residents who had been beheaded in a car accident. And that actually was what happened to the previous residents of that house. This certainly wasn't the only supernatural experience in that house, but it was the last I know of. We moved almost immediately, possibly even that night. And that is the story that inspired the poem, the Nikekubi, that I wrote in Tortured Willows. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was just stunning and evocative, and I will think twice the next time I look at my mischievous in my collection. Our next reader is Holley Cornetto. Holley, can you join us on the platform of doom? Holley Cornetto is a writer, librarian, professor, book reviewer, and transplanted Southerner. Her novella, We Haunt These Woods, was published by Bleeding Edge Books. In addition to writing the Horror Trees newsletter, she reviews for Publishers Weekly and the Horror Tree. She teaches creative writing at Southern New Hampshire University. Holley,
hi.
Take us into your world.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a little snippet of kind of where we are in the story, because I'm not beginning at the beginning. So in this story, it's important for you to know that my main character, Lynn, is an alcoholic who's just been kicked out of a rehab program. Her twin sister, Anne, has taken her to their grandmother's house where they spent summers when they were children, to help her recover. So I'm just going to jump in and, here we go. I was still staring at the clock on the bedside table at 3 a.m. Though the rest of the house was layered with decades of dust, Anne had cleaned and prepared the bedrooms for our visit. The room she'd made up for me was the same one I'd slept in when we were kids. It was smaller now, like the house had shriveled and shrank with old age and Granny's absence. The creaks and groans of settling wood whispered of how long it had been since a living soul had wandered these desolate halls. I wondered if Mutter's hole would still be open. I could imagine Teeny in her tube top and tight jeans, standing behind the bar, flirting with every pretty girl who came in. We tried to make a go of it once and decided to get clean together, even attended AA meetings at the First Methodist Church. It had been a beautiful, hurtful relationship with more downs than ups. When it ended, so did my brief stint of sobriety. I sat up and put my slippers on. There was no point in dwelling on the past and other things too broken to repair. My stomach rumbled. If Anne had gotten the bedrooms ready, she'd probably stocked the kitchen too. I stepped out into the hallway and tiptoed past Anne's room. She'd left the door cracked open, probably so she could hear me if I decided to sneak out and do God knows what. I took a deep breath and choked, inhaling thick layers of dust accumulated through years of emptiness. The fleur-de-lis paper hung from the wall in strips. The only things holding it in place were cobwebs strung like curtains along the ceiling. The musty odor was new. I could sense something deeper than memory, more concrete than the vague sense of unease that I felt. It was as if the house had been sleeping since Granny's death, and now that Anne and I had returned, it had finally woken up. 3 women sat at the kitchen table, their heads bowed and hands locked together in prayer. Granny called them the Praying Sisters. Of all the ghosts in the house, these were the ones Anne had asked about the most. We'd always talked about ghosts before. Anne saw different ones from those that I saw, so we traded stories. She'd even had nightmares. Then one day, it was like she stopped seeing them. She still asked about mine, though, at least for a while. Granny tried explaining the mysteries of the afterlife to me once or twice. Most of the ghosts are harmless enough, she'd said. They just want to be seen and remembered. But some are drawn to the living. They want to possess, to take over, to begin anew. Those are the ones that lurk unseen in corners and prey upon the vulnerable. The Praying Sisters had always been the harmless sort, content to sit around the table in prayer. They hadn't changed in the years since I'd seen them last, still wearing their Sunday best dresses, at least 100 years old. "Hello, ladies," I said as I approached them. They never answered, but it felt rude to ignore them regardless. The fridge's contents made me roll my eyes. Anne went vegan a year ago, convinced the diet would help her live forever. Almond milk, cashew cheese, and a big block of tofu sat on the main shelf. Going without booze was one thing, but going without bacon, well, that was another matter entirely. After taking a glass from the cabinet, I turned on the tap. The pipes gurgled and started, and then spit out brown water. Does nothing in this house work anymore? I slammed the glass down on the counter, but it wasn't the house I was angry at. I reached in the fridge for the almond milk, pouring glass and emptying it in a few large swallows. Almond milk was not going to slake the kind of thirst I had. I replaced the carton and closed the fridge, leaning against the door. The Praying Sisters stared straight at me. I bit my lip to stifle a yelp. They'd never moved before and never paid any attention to the living. Sorry if I disturbed you." My voice was shaking. With their heads raised, I could see their faces clearly. In the kitchen's dim light, they looked older than I'd thought, probably in their 50s. Beware the bottle. I couldn't tell which one of them spoke. None of their mouths moved. The hairs on my arms stood. The ghost had never spoken before. I gulped down oxygen in shallow, rapid breaths, processing the words she'd said. Beware the bottle? Jesus Christ, even the ghosts knew I was an alcoholic. My fear turned to anger. These people were dead. What right did they have to lecture me? Mind your own business, I snapped before crossing the room and heading back down the hall. I hesitated in front of Anne's door. Part of me wanted to wake her and tell her what had happened. We were 13 the first time she told me to stop talking about ghosts, that it wasn't funny to make things up anymore. And it made me think that maybe that was why her ghosts had always been different from mine. Maybe she hadn't actually seen them. She'd only made up the stories, like she thought I'd been doing. After that, I only talked to Granny about the ghosts. I crept back to bed, pulled the blanket over my head in case any of the house's other residents decided to lecture me about how I was living my life. And I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you so much, Holly. That's such a wonderful combination of real world experience and the spiritual universe of ghosts, and then the family layered on is just so evocative of everything. I'm so glad you were able to make it. It was a really engaging reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And we're getting lots of nice comments in the chat. No one's asking questions. They're just listening. Our next reader is N.D. Jones. N.D. Jones, EDD, is a USA Today best-selling author who lives in Maryland with her family. In her desire to see more novels with positive, sexy, and three-dimensional Black characters as soulmates, friends, and lovers, she took on that challenge herself. ND, introduce us to these wonderful characters.
Thank you. Of Deception and Divinity is the third book in my Death and Destiny paranormal romance trilogy. So in this excerpt, open up the page. You'll be introduced to Sonora. Sonora is my heroine. She is the prophesized fire witch of legend. And at this point, she's been haunted by the previous fire witch of legend, who was also happened to be her ancestor. So she decides to summon her. Born into fire, yet cast into violence, I call to thee. I summon thee. Come, sister. Sonora formed a fireball in the palm of her hand, blew on it, and then whispered, come, fire witch of legend, I demand your presence. Using wind magic, Sonora shoved the fireball into the center of the salt circle. Wind merged with fire and exploded. Howling flames and furious shrieks followed. In the center of the roaring storm of chaos was a fully formed and contained fire witch of legend. Green eyes bled to scarlet when she saw Sonora. Enraged, she dove for her, only to slam into the protective barrier of Sonora's salt and blood circles. She tried over and again, hurling her body against the invisible field, her anger growing with each failed attempt. Salt crackled and blood sizzled, keeping the soul of the fire witch of legend within the containment field. Still, the wild woman fought, cursing in a language Sonora didn't know. Her brown, lithe form naked, in red gold hair and a plume of billowing smoke. Exhausted from watching her predecessor wage a pointless battle, Sonora sat on the floor in front of the circle and waited. Release me, you pathetic layer of volcanic ash, she screamed. Sonora ignored her, as if she'd gone through all the trouble of summoning and capturing the fire witch, just to turn around and let her go because she asked. Not even nicely, which was what Sonora had come to expect of the dead witch. She was a nasty piece of work, but Sonora didn't think the woman had started off that way. She practiced patience. It was Saturday. Asufa was off doing whatever bullheaded werecats did, and Mr. Siddick and Manute knew not to come knocking when they heard strange noises coming from her bedchamber. Sonora must have fallen asleep, because the next thing she heard was the witch yell, wake up, you despicable child. How dare you summon and cage me, then have the temerity to fall asleep while I'm in the middle of cursing you and your unborn children. Sleeping on the floor didn't feel good without her mingwa to serve as a big fluffy pillow. Sonora rolled from where she'd been sleeping on her side into a cross-legged position. It's your fault that I'm so tired. As if to prove her point, Sonora yawned. I haven't slept well in weeks, not since you began invading my dreams, which, by the way, I don't appreciate. The fire witch slumped to the floor, mirroring Sonora's cross-legged position. Considering she wore nothing below her waist, Sonora made sure to keep her eyes north of the border. What do you want from me, child? To know why you've decided to haunt my dreams? Because I can. Because I'm evil, and that's what evil creatures do. Because you're my only connection to a life I loved and lost. Because I hate you for your youth and innocence and utter ignorance. Because your mate still lives while mine is long since dead. Okay, that was a hell of a lot of reasons, most of which Sonora had no interest in exploring. Tell me about your mate. My what? The question had taken the fire witch of legend by surprise. Good. Your mate, the man you loved and lost. Tell me about him. What was his name? In fact, what's your name? She blinked at Sonora. You summoned me here to kill me. I never said that. But you have me in this cage of salt and blood. Why else if not to kill me for terrorizing your sleeping mind? I have no desire to kill you, but I do have a vested interest in you not murdering me. Perhaps not so ignorant after all. Well, you still are. You're just not a fool, for I would slay you now that I'm corporeal and you're so very close. Good to know. So, tell me your name and the name of your mate. Sonora crawled to the bed, making sure not to break the circle. After grabbing a pillow, she made her way to the wall closest to the fire witch, propped the pillow against it, and then leaned her back into it. This felt better, but Sonora still wasn't comfortable. Perhaps she should have gotten 2 pillows, one for her back and the other for her to sit on. Done, child. First you fall asleep. Now you squirm and frown as if you have crickets in your pants. You sound like my mother, and I only need one of those. By the way, before you start judging, you may want to first close your legs. The Fire Witch of Legend glanced down at herself, then shrugged. There's no shame in the new form. I suppose times have changed, but I see no point for me to do so. I am, after all, quite dead. Technically, the witch was undead, which explained how she could both travel into Sonora's dream and be summoned and contained in a magic circle, body as solid as Sonora's. You aren't nearly as entertaining awake as you are asleep. As such, I will humor you and answer your odd questions. My name is Shanumi, and my mate's name was Abu Bakr. Sonora's head clumped against the wall, the same initials as Sonora and Asufa. That was taking the prophecy and Fire Witch and Cat of Legend too damn far. It bordered on weird and was creepy as hell. Tell me about him. How did you meet? What did you know? When did you know you first loved Abu Bakr? After another hesitation and grumbled curses about intrusive and impertinent children, Shanuma began to speak. Sonora closed her eyes and listened to her love story. Like most true love stories, it was full of tears and smiles, laughter and anger, joy and heartache. In other words, Shanumi and Abu Bakr were quite human, she shy and awkward, and he proud and protective. I'll stop there.
No, I'd sort of rather we had like another half hour so we could get to the end of the chapter. That was you need to go over to the chat and just read everything everyone was saying while you were reading, because that was awesome. I love your characters. Thank you for bringing them to us.
Thank you.
And it's time for our final reader of the day, who is Nicole M. Wolverton. There she is in all her glory. Nicole M. Wolverton is a Pushcart nominated writer of horror and speculative fiction and also creative nonfiction. Her short works appear in dozens of publications, and her debut young adult novel, A Misfortune of Lake Monsters, will be out in summer of 2024 from Camcat Books. She lives in the Philadelphia area. Nicole, bring this whole event home with one last reading.
No pressure. This is a very truncated version of Harvest, which appears in the Wordsmiths from Hollow Oak Press. The story was inspired by my late grandparents' farm. It's daybreak. Mama's out on the thresher. When I get her text to come fetch her, that she might need stitches, I know it's bad. Farmers are a tough old bunch. I take the little tractor out. Granddaddy used to tell all sorts of stories about farm accidents. Always warned not to go near the fields after dark once soil got a taste of the blood. A few minutes on the tractor and there's Mama, swaying in the soybeans. The thresher, a streak of her blood down the cab, is a few rows over. I eyeball her. You want to take the tractor back and I'll get the thresher? Mama shakes her head. You leave that thresher right where it is. Don't you have a test today? She's lucid enough to remember my algebra test. Comforting, even if she is sprouting the family superstition as gospel. We balance on the tractor seat, roar off toward home. Dad's coming in from milking. God almighty, Sue Ann, what happened? Just sliced my hand. Mama swings off the tractor, heads for our kitchen, still dripping blood. She shouts back, Jenny, you get cleaned up and off to school, and stay out of them fields. We'll pick things up tomorrow when the dirt has time to forget. You mind your mama. Dad jogs off after her. Superstition won't bring the soybeans in. By the time I'm in my bedroom getting decent, Mama and Dad are whispering, loud through the thin walls. Lucky you wasn't killed, Dad says. Mama says, Peter, I think it might be time to tell Jenny the truth. I'm on my bike to school before they can tell me anything. As I pedal out of the driveway, I catch a glimpse of the thresher in the field. Looking like a sulking child, I keep going. After school, the idea of going home to hear how we can't harvest the soybeans because of cursed fields is even less appealing. I hold off as long as I can before pedaling home. And now it's too dim to be on these country roads full of trucks. I cut off the road through our fields, pedal down the main path to the barn. Our farmhouse is a jack-o'-lantern smile of windows. A broad wind rumbles through the soybeans. The silly stories about the blood-greedy ground keep running through my head. I'm halfway down the path when a whisper seeps out of the field. It calls my name, low and reedy. It's all in my head, I know that. No one could hear these stories again and again without them sinking in. I keep going, and the whisper comes again, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter. Jenny. A moment later, the wind says, come to me. I leap off the bike when I clear the field, run for the house. I'm through the door, back heaved up against it from the inside, feeling silly. Dad walks into the kitchen. Tough ride home? I force a smile. Got spooked in the fields is all. Dad hustles me into the living room. To Mama, he says, she been out in those fields. Mama's eyes go wide. She pulls a photo album from the side table, shows me a picture of a man in front of our thresher. His red hair is just this side of long, skin pale as butter. That's Marsh Sweeney, she says. You seen him? I shake my head no. Her eyes narrow anyway. Dad says, Marsh lent that thresher out there to my dad for harvest years ago when I was a kid. Marsh had a heart attack while he was driving it over. Mama taps the photo. Thresher pulled Marsh in when he fell. Family never took it back. I groan. So this is about the fields again? The blood? This is your truth? You know your granddaddy died out there, don't you, Mama says? Maybe half a dozen others in the family? I shrug. Farming's a dangerous business. Every last one of them heard their names called from the fields after there was an accident on the thresher. Before they died. I never said a thing to Dad and Mama about my name being whispered. Hours later, I'm lying in bed staring at the ceiling. Me? If there were actual danger, I'd be awake and watchful, but Mama and Dad are just snoring away. So they're not actually worried. They just want me to buy into the family lore about soil and want of blood and whispered names. I tiptoe out of my room and down the hall, unlock the door and step outside. No moon, and even the stars are hidden by a blanket of clouds. A sudden wind sneaks into my pajamas. I billow like the sails of a ship skimming through the backyard as though riding ocean waves. I stare into the fields. I know there's nothing to be afraid of. And yet the wind whispers again. Jenny. I'll hold there until the sunrise if I have to prove to everyone Granddaddy's stories are bunk. Moments later, I swear I catch a glimpse of red hair in the field. Mama had to go and tell me all about Marsh Sweeney. She had to plant the idea. I take a step and then another, and I'm in the field myself. There is no red-headed ghost. I pick my way down a row until the dull blades of the thresher seem to leap up out of nowhere. There it is, spiky rows of metal teeth in the reel waiting for me, grinning. A streak of Mama's blood still stains the cab. Mama and Dad must have moved it. It was much further away when I got home. I trip, land heavy on my hands. My palm is wet with blood. I crawl to the thresher and heave myself upright against the frame. And then the sound of an engine rumbling to life mixes into the wind. I'm still hearing things, seeing what Mama and Dad expect me to. That must be why a man-shaped shadow is next to me now, whispering into my ear, his red hair blowing. I almost laugh when he wraps his cold arms around me. The thresher bolts forward. I'm imagining all this, of course. Even the sharp pain that comes, it's all in my head. Those planted ideas, planted like soybeans. The thresher keeps coming. In moments, I am nothing but bits of blood and bone and wheezy screams. Farmers really are a tough old bunch. But I know now, the thresher wants for blood. The thresher and Marsh, not the fields. Not the fields. My lungs gasp one last time for air, and Marsh clutches me harder. I am chewed up meat, feeding the shadow man, feeding the thresher, and yes, feeding the land. And then there is no more screaming, no more gasping, and yet I hear my voice clear in the wind, wanting my family. Mama, Daddy, come to me. And that is the end. So I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I want to thank Strong Women, Strange Worlds for their incredible work today, the whole day. And of course, thank you for having me and everyone on today. I think I probably speak on behalf of all the writers today. It's been a phenomenal event. Thank you.
It has indeed been a wonderful time together, reading stories, listening to stories. And everybody behind the scenes and in front of cameras hopes that everybody who is attending and everybody who agreed to be on camera and do something today had fun and felt it was worth their day today. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you for being a wonderful group of readers and for submitting to a brief panel discussion at the end. Nobody told you might be up for that. So I thank you so much.